Hi everyone. Hope everyone can hear me. Unfortunately, my Wi-Fi is awful, so hopefully I'll survive for the hour. Just to introduce this session, what I want to highlight is that we're going to have three different fireside chats. One with Sir Aaron Boots, then Matt from Blockworks, and Mark from Cyfrin. But as part of these fireside chats, what I really want to get out of it is that a lot of people like to talk about successful proposals. Where here, what I want to talk about are the unsuccessful proposals, because they weren't really unsuccessful. They made it fail to vote, maybe it got rejected. But as we're going to see, nearly every proposal has led to something bigger. And it's really, what was that bigger thing? Why did it fail? And hopefully, what have we learned from that? So with that in mind, we have our first speaker. Welcome, Sir Aaron Boots. Welcome to the stage. I don't know if you managed
Hello,
to get,
sir.
I don't know if you managed to get your helmet or not, but
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately, I'm saving that for the next Arbitrum day. My full suit of armor is being constructed as we speak.
that'd be so funny. Well, we can get started anyway. Let's get an introduction. So, what project are you associated with, and what do you spend most of your day doing? What do you
Uh,
spend your day working on?
sure, yeah. So I'm one of the Camelot co-founders. The other ones are much smarter than me. And yeah, Camelot obviously is one of the largest Arbitrum protocols with the largest native DEX. And I guess I won't reel off the list of accolades, but hopefully you know about us if you're on Arbitrum. And yeah, I'd say personally, I spend most of my day doing, I guess, what you would call BD and partnerships. But we're a very small team, so of course, as always in any startup, no role is that specific, and it crosses into everything. So yeah, the other two co-founders are the devs and the guys that really build it from the ground up, and then I guess I handle everything else on the partnership, relationship, growth side.
Well, that's awesome. Also, guys, if you have any questions, just to the audience, if you have any questions, just drop it in the chat, and I'll try to pick them up at the very end. Just thought I'd throw that out there. And maybe and just one last part of the introduction is, how did you get involved in crypto, Arbitrum? What's your backstory? How did you get on the rabbit hole and end up with us here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that comes through partly Camelot's origins as well. So before Camelot was doing many different things in Cosmos, Polkadot type worlds, which are a strange place to start your crypto journey. But I think very good perspective on many different, topics. But yeah, and I mean, ultimately Camelot had history before Arbitrum, obviously. There was a protocol back on Phantom back in the day. It initially was, partnered with Terra and got completely destroyed because of that. So that was kind of the birth, or rebirth, I should say, of Camelot, which really, it was a couple months building after Terra blew up. And then at that point, it was deciding where to launch, and that's a pretty tricky decision when you're building a new protocol. Probably not any easier now, but yeah, at the time, it was really Camelot's whole thesis is quite simple in that, like, just being a good native DEX is the product. Like, it's very simple. People come to Arbitrum to buy Arbitrum tokens, and to build kind of the product and the app around that was basically the goal, right? And I think historically, if you look at like native dexes, they're always on every chain, right? You will always have a native dex. It just makes sense. But typically, they're kind of like cheap and easy, like forks, right? Like, people don't really tend to take them super seriously. So I think Camelot was kind of like, well, being a native dex gives you inherent market fit. What happens if we like really try and actually build on this like more seriously and with a long-term vision in mind, rather than just like the latest yield farm on a new chain? And then yeah, basically, I mean, after kind of having that approach or strategy in mind, it was then Arbitrum really was kind of the best place to try and build that, which obviously in hindsight was a great decision. But at the time, GMX I think was the largest protocol. So it definitely wasn't that big at the time. But I think it still had kind of the same vibe as it does now, where it's like the closest thing you can get to Ethereum DeFi, I think, in that it's like, even back then, of course, like before you had incentives, before you had the DAO, before you had all of like this billions in TVL, it still felt very, very genuine. and very just organic. So like that's the most fertile grounds to build an ecosystem on, really. And yeah, luckily it paid off.
Yeah, that's incredible. I wasn't aware that you were a Terra initially, and then obviously we all know what happened to Terra, and then you came to Arbitrum and built a home. And yeah, and that sort of leads on to the next question, really. And just to give a bit of context to everyone here, it can be said that Camelot submitted a proposal to the DAO. It was called Accelerating Arbitrum, leveraging Camelot as an ecosystem hub to support native builders. And as you mentioned, as a native DEX, it touches a lot of different DeFi protocols that live in Arbitrum. And again, it was one of the first big proposals to reach the DAO. Unfortunately, as we're going to learn, it failed the vote, but it led on to something much, much bigger, which was eventually the STIP. But let's just get into the proposal first. What was your proposal about? Like, what sort of grant did you want to get from the Arbitrum DAO? And what was it like being the first one to do that? Sort of like the pioneer astronaut who's willing to go out to the DAO and to see what happens.
Yeah, it was fun to say the least. But I know, I mean, I think at that time, and also, yeah, I'm still annoyed it didn't pass purely because of the title alone. Because like Accelerating Arbitrum was like, I was so proud of that. It was very catchy. But no, I mean, I think at that point it was, I think early in the year, the ecosystem really had like its first serious run. Where Camelot was one of the most popular things at the time, and GMX was going crazy, and with 20 different GLP protocols, and Arbitrum was really kind of at the forefront, I think, of most people's attention, and it just made sense, that after the ARB token was launched, the DAO was there, and obviously kind of the very first foundations for like the overall Arbitrum structure, but like we were kind of looking around and seeing like, okay, well, the DAO has X amount of money, several billion. How can we like use this? Like that was literally the first question, and then it was like just a continual progress of like speaking to you guys and everybody else, and it being like, well, if you want to use it, you kind of need to just try something and go from there. Like there really was no guidance or framework or there was literally nothing at that point, right? Which was quite funny and scary. So it basically just got to a point where like we tried to figure out what was going on, very quickly realized like nothing was going to happen unless you just threw your hat in the ring, and just basically said we have no idea what's going to happen, there's no expectations, but at least it might start the conversation, and luckily it definitely achieved that. So I think it was definitely productive, but it was definitely difficult, right? Because like until you go through a period like that, you don't even know who the delegates are, right? Like you don't even know who the delegates are, especially as a protocol. You don't know the process. You don't know, like until you actually, have to physically experience it. You're just not aware of anything. So it was a baptism of fire. But I think ultimately, it was just as simple as like, Albertrum's got this huge war chest, and how can we use it? And yeah, like you say, obviously that vote was a bit contentious, which wasn't too surprised about. But I think for us as well, the main goal really was for it to cause some progress. I
mean, just to jump into that a little bit, and I do want to highlight, as you mentioned, the Arbitrum DAO does have a very significant war chest. It gets all the revenue from Arbitrum 1. It has like 8,000 ETH today, and of course it has like 35% of the ARB tokens. So the DAO is very well resourced to do these sort of initiatives. But as you mentioned, you went into the fire, you submitted your proposal. What do you think the community's reaction was? Like, how would you summarize it? Do you think they how would you summarize the community's reaction, the delegates' reaction? Like, why did it eventually lead to this sort of framework by the STIP? How do you think they sort of dealt with this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's always so hard to tell as well, right? Like what the genuine reaction is, because like if you look at the forum, it's going to be one thing. If you look at Twitter, it's going to be another thing. If you speak to your partners, it's going to be, so it's like, I think that was also one of the genuine difficulties of, what is the real sentiment, and it's, of course, delegates, naturally big delegates don't want to tell you how they're going to vote until they vote, which makes sense, but it makes it all very difficult to actually work out like what a real sense of like how it's going to go. So I think the main feedback, yeah, was there were a lot of concerns about like, to give a grant just to one protocol, like I'd say like the main point really was obviously the initial conversations of what would be the framework, because it does make sense that if you give just one protocol a grant without a framework, it creates a bit of a messy situation, right? So I think overall we got pretty good feedback, because I genuinely think we spent weeks on that proposal and really made it as, I mean, Camelot itself is probably one of the most aligned to Arbitrum protocols, because like our entire success is basis on Arbitrum success. So I think most people saw kind of that, and they saw the contributions we made, like just throughout the year. So I think, yeah, really the kind of crux of what came out of it was the need for a framework, which we fully supported, because like I say, I think the main concern after Camelot's proposal, or if any direct proposal got supported, was it's very advantageous to the largest protocols, right? Because to post a proposal, to get it to hit quorum, to get it to succeed, like there's very few protocols I think in Arbitrum that could do that single-handedly. So in the absence of a framework, that would have been, like I say, very messy, because there's no budget, there's nothing, right? Like there's really nothing. So we kind of took the calls for a framework. They were pretty valid, obviously, and then yeah, that's ultimately what led into STIP. But I would say even after our proposal, there was definitely a period, maybe a month or two, I can't remember the exact period, but there's definitely a time where it was still very unclear what was going to happen, right? And I think at the time, and obviously even now, these feel like pains, because at some point you want to be told how it's going to work. And like if you're sitting there kind of twiddling your thumbs thinking, well, it got voted against, but now we don't really know what to do, and we're still kind of in this gray zone. Like that's obviously a very frustrating position to be in as a protocol, because you feel a bit lost. But I would say, the reason it's like that is because Arbitrum, or the DAO, genuinely did kind of start as decentralized as you could be for something of that scale. So yeah, there was obviously a lot of pains, and like I say, it definitely wasn't easy, and there's a million things you can do better. But I would say the fact that something of that size and scale managed to move kind of on the timeline that it did is still quite genuinely impressive. Like even for the toughest DAO critics in the world, like you have to give some credit due that we went from Camelot's proposal in July to a very, very small working group afterwards, right? Like there was maybe one or two free protocols after the Camelot proposal that were like in the initial working group. It was definitely like not as popular as it is as now. And then yeah, from July till, I mean, when did STIP like officially start? Maybe November, December. So like the fact that yeah, $4 billion treasury with, and that's the thing as well. I think from the outside, it's like it was very funny seeing like like governance collusion or mafia or whatever you want to call it. Maybe it looks like that from the outside if you really want to make clickbait, but in the end, it really wasn't like that, and it really is difficult to actually coordinate within the DAO. So that's why I think it's actually even more of a credit that like that happens, because just because you're a big protocol, just because you're Camelot, doesn't mean that delegates all respond to you and everything that goes on. Like we were just as in the dark as I think many smaller protocols, which not a lot. I think a lot of people assume just because you're Camelot and you're the big guy that it's super easy, but at that time it was definitely not like that. So yeah,
So maybe to summarize that, sorry, just to summarize a little bit. So it sounds like the proposal failed. There was a couple of months period. A bit frustrating as well, isn't it? It's like my proposal failed. What do I do next? There's no structure here. We don't really understand how to get forward. And then a small working group sort of formed, and then over the period of a few months, that eventually led to the STIP. Is that the best way to summarize it?
Pretty much, yeah. Like so, it went from before Camelot's proposal, there was literally nothing, and we were obviously the first. And then after Camelot's proposal, it was we should do incentives, but we need a framework. And then there was, like I said, there was a period where literally nothing happened, and then obviously like some guys like T-Norm and a few others and Joe, etc. And like I said, at that point, there's maybe Camelot and 1, 2 other protocols. eventually kind of pushed the framework together, and then obviously, yeah, that was STIP. So yeah, that when you look at it in hindsight, that did happen quite quickly, even though it felt very long at the time.
I mean, yeah, even from my side, it felt very long from the time, but on hindsight, it's actually quite quick. And actually, one thing I want to highlight, because I normally use Camelot as the example. So when I talk to projects, I'm like, guys, you should come to the Arbitrum DAO. There's so much cool stuff going on. I always use Camelot as the example because you know the proposal sort of failed, then it led to the STIP, but it didn't just lead to the STIP. If I remember correctly, I think Camelot got the most votes in the STIP as well. Everyone
that
basically
was
voted for
nice.
Camelot. That was nice, isn't it?
That was nice to be like, okay, those months of punishment were worth it. But yeah, that was, and I think that's also kind of one of the things that, like, I had obviously a lot of protocols were speaking to each other, and I think a lot of protocols suddenly appeared. Well, not suddenly appeared, but a lot of protocols naturally got very interested when STIP arrived, right? Because everybody wants a grant, like nothing wrong with that. But I think some people got a bit disheartened or a bit annoyed that like they didn't get that much support. And when you don't get supported, it's very easy to say, oh, it's because of whatever, like favoritism or whatever, like tribalism. But like the reality is, like, I think Camelot only got that much support because, like you say, we were doing this since June, July. Like, I don't think it was because Camelot's like a sexy name or anything. I think it's because we had really gone through that process ourselves. And like I say, had we not done that, we wouldn't have been speaking to any delegates. I mean, like I say, our proposal basically got critiqued 1 million times a day on the forum. So, like, so it was only because of that obviously, we got the only
you got the most votes.
200 over 200 million. So I'll take that. That's a nice compliment.
No, it's a great compliment. It's great, isn't it? It's like the DAO sort of rewarded you for the pain and the agony that you went through for a bunch of months. And also just on that, I always recommend people, like, since the STIP, every protocol today should have someone involved in governance. You should be involved in the DAO, getting to know the community, and that's how you eventually, hopefully, get rewarded as well. Now we have time for one question. Alex has asked a question from Savi, and then we're just nearly out of time, so I'll ask the question. Curious to hear the process of developing the proposal, speaking to the delegates, the forum posts. Especially given how lean Camelot was. What was that burden like on yourself and Camelot of sort of getting involved in this? What was that process like?
It's a good question. I mean, yeah, like the truth is, even now, it's like I think every big protocol in Arbitrum now is thinking we need literally somebody full-time dedicated to the DAO, because I think the intensity or just the time that we were spending back then to do the first one was full-time. And like now, obviously, it's super busy, right? Because incentives are live, and like for us, it's a genuine struggle to balance, the hat of protocol, delegate, DAO, advocate, whatever, So it literally was our number one focus from, like I say, from June till I think I can't remember exactly. I think we posted in July, right? So for 2-3 months, it was pretty much the main thing we did, which was, I think it was lucky because the market was quite bearish. So, you had a bit more slack without, partners and everything. But yeah, it was definitely like our full-time job, which, is a shame because, it would be nice to spend just as much time now. But like, unfortunately, that's just not possible, which is good because, like I say, at that time in the DAO, after AIP one, like I think Camelot's proposal after it was like the next biggest, almost active. So like at the time, Arbitrum governance in general was also quite generally quite quiet, and like the Camelot proposal was like the only one at the time to really follow. Whereas now, obviously, you have like multiple ongoing, right? So it's definitely not that much easier now.
I mean, hopefully there's more people on the ground now who can help with this, and it's not just up to the protocols to try to push everything forward.
Exactly, yeah, and like there's the incentive is there, like hopefully the incentive is making people positively aligned, obviously. But yeah, I think there was a natural bit of hesitation after AIP1, and just with the lack of structure and guidance, people were just yeah. It was a difficult situation, I think. So I think it almost had to be Camelot do the first one to at least cause some noise to get people involved. And now obviously, yeah, like it's 6 months later and it's like completely different, right? I'm sure you firsthand have seen, I'm not saying this only because of Camelot, obviously, but like there's definitely a night and day difference between earlier in the year and now.
No,
So.
there is. If anything, if anyone ever writes the history of the Arbitrum DAO, Camelot's gonna have a chapter in that. One of the first chapters.
Well, as long as next year's cool, Camelot can be on the successful panel.
Well, let's see from the results of this.
That's all I ask for. We'll be promoted, but
that's awesome. Well, we're out of time now anyway. Yeah. Anyway, but thank you very much, Aaron Boots, for the chat. I think everyone here really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Cheers. And then next up is Matt from Blockworks, where we're hopefully going to learn more about the Arbitrum Coalition. And that's more of a recent proposal to see what happened and what's happening next. So hopefully we can get Matt to jump up.
Pat, could you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. Oh, look at those guitars. Oh my God. You're set up for this call.
Yeah, I got a cool background. I'm actually traveling, so I'm at my friend's house. These are his guitars. I can't take credit, but it's pretty good background for sure.
I was going to ask you, play guitar. That's incredible. Well, we can get started now anyway. So first, let's find out a bit more about yourself. What project are you associated with, and what do you spend most of your day working on?
Yes, I'm Matt Feeback. I work at Blockworks on the research team. So if you're not familiar with Blockworks, we're an events and media company. So we have an editorial arm that does news on blockworks.com. We have two big events, which are Permissionless and DAS, coming up in London in March. So Permissionless is more focused on kind of like the DeFi and on-chain crowd, and DAS is more aimed at the institutional crowd. And then Blockworks Research specifically is the team I work on, and we provide investable insights to investors. So it's mostly hedge funds, institutions, and some larger individual investors. We try to kind of sit in between the protocols and like technical research as well as investable. So like how can you turn technical research into something that would be relevant to an investor? And every analyst has very niche coverage. So I specifically cover perps and optimistic LTs.
Awesome. And then maybe just a bit more about yourself as well. How did you get involved in Arbitrum? Maybe that's through work, but also what's your backstory? How did you get into crypto? How did you end up coming down this rabbit hole with us?
Yes, I've actually been, crypto is pretty much the only thing I've ever worked in. I just got really obsessed with Bitcoin and kind of the idea of sovereign money in 2013, 2014. I was literally a kid. I was 14 years old. So, I didn't have a lot of money, didn't have any way of getting into the industry, but kind of slowly started making some connections. Throughout high school, I did like whatever I could to get into the industry. So I worked as like a Discord moderator and, jobs of that nature, and then slowly worked my way up. Throughout college, with my backgrounds in computer science and finance, I did some quant work at a hedge fund called Ikigai, as well as worked at a VC fund and an under-collateralized lending protocol. So at that point, kind of started like working my way into the industry. And then at the end of college, I started working at Blockworks on the research team. So I was the first hire over there. And since we've grown into a team of about 10, into Arbitrum specifically, I've been a user of Arbitrum since pretty much the early days, way before token generation. And then before token generation, there was the announcement of we're looking for delegates. And I was like, okay, Blockworks Research, like we're already very involved in governance as far as we spend a lot of time in the forums because there is actually investable information that can be found there. But additionally, like, okay, it's time to stop just being, third-party observers and actually get involved and contribute. Like we have the capability, we have the sophistication, so we should be doing this. Since we've also become a Uniswap delegate, so now we're active in Arbitrum as well as Uniswap. But yeah, moral of the story, I lead up our governance initiatives over at Blockworks.
That's awesome. Well, let's jump into your proposal then. Your proposal was called the Arbitrum Coalition. And before we get into the details, when I spoke to your team at Blockworks, the way they described the Arbitrum Coalition was sort of like Matt's baby or Matt's pet project, where you're just like pushing it forward single-handedly with all these big I don't know the best way to describe the ship in a way. You're the one. Oh crap! Sorry, I lost my internet. But basically, this was your baby that you really worked hard on to push forward. So maybe do you want to walk us through your proposal? What was the problem you're trying to solve? Why might it be useful to the Arbitrum DAO? And why is this just like a really cool, exciting proposal?
Yeah, so as Iron Boots was mentioning, the Arbitrum DAO has a large treasury with a significant amount of revenue coming in. I think it's like $4 billion in ARB plus, some 30 ETH a day in sequencer revenue, which is likely to increase in the future. But outside of just, having a large treasury and a lot of funds to spend, the DAO also controls more parameters of the protocol than pretty much any other protocol out there. It's like truly centralized. So the DAO has the ability to, switch out the fraud-proof mechanism or switch out the sequencer and all these really technical subjects. So because of the nature of Arbitrum, there's going to be a lot of proposals about how to spend treasury funds, but also likely in the future, we're going to see more technical, proposals. And I think that we're just now starting to hear some of this conversation. So, like maybe we should be changing the gas token from ETH to ARB or something of that nature. And there's a lot of implications to these proposals. And obviously not every delegate can have this wide range of knowledge that's required for all these different subjects. So for instance, at Blockworks Research on our team of 10, like we have a pretty diverse range of knowledge, but at the same time, there's still things that, I know it's tough for us to make decisions on as delegates. So one thing that comes to mind is, auditing the executables attached to on-chain proposals. That's something that's pretty difficult for our team. And even if you're a delegate that has a super sophistication in that specific area, maybe incentive programs aren't something that you're, super familiar with or have the ability to analyze well. So the idea was kind of, let's create this group of service providers who has the ability to provide tools that would empower delegates to make more informed decisions around proposals. So, in March, kind of started thinking about this idea, especially when we saw all the grants programs proposals back then. And then additionally, there was a few other proposals that kind of gave me this idea of like, okay, we're already seeing.
I don't mean to interrupt, but did you say in March you were thinking about this like really early on, like April, March, like when you first discovered the DAO?
Yeah, I think like March we started seeing like a few proposals in the forum. Like I know I put one up about using sequencer revenue, and then April was, I think there was 3 separate grants programs proposals that all came. So when it was the grants programs, where it really gave me the idea of like, okay, maybe there's something here. Likely this is foreshadowing that in the future we're going to have a whole lot more proposals. So it's actually a conversation with you maybe a month or two later where I was like, I wonder if this is a service that would be interesting to the DAO. Where I kind of like started formalizing the idea of like, okay, who are the actual entities we'd want involved in this? So like, started thinking about maybe a law firm would be good, maybe a quantitative risk, maybe we should have more research firms involved and things of that nature. And then over the next few months, not only started getting an idea of, okay, these are the exact entities that want involved. So, a risk auditing firm, a quantitative risk firm, and probably a risk research firm. But also I started doing kind of this process of who are the players in the space. And trying to figure out which actual service providers would be best to fit into this coalition. I think even though the idea I had early on is really cemented while I was doing that process, as far as, the STIP came, the proposals kind of started to heat up. We saw a lot of different proposals, a lot of different nature. And also the community started to really, I think, feel empowered to some extent of, okay, let's get involved. Let's make Arbitrum as great as it can be. So at that point, fast forward to maybe June, I had a good idea of who we wanted involved in this organization, as well as at that point had already went ahead and worked my way up and gotten my way involved in with all these different service providers and got working on the proposal. Additionally, like one thing from the start that I thought would be important was that it should be subservient to the DAO. So obviously, like, you could go to Off-Chain Labs, you could go to Foundation, and some of these service providers already do work with those entities. But from my perspective, it was really good to have this organization subservient to the DAO specifically. At that point, you kind of lose some of the centralization risk of maybe Off-Chain Labs one day would get negatively encumbered, hopefully, God forbid. But it just would, in my head, is very important and would be awesome if, the DAO had this Hydra network of different service providers. And if one of them fell, it wouldn't be a big deal and the DAO would be resourced to continue to march on.
Yeah, well, maybe let's ask about that, because I feel like a large part of your proposal was a procurement process that you did yourself to negotiate the rates with these large players, and it's fair to say you really did get special rates with some of these providers. Even I was quite surprised when I saw the costs. So my question around the vendors were, what was that procurement process like? But most importantly, when you spoke to the vendors, Was there any hesitation on their side? Were they not just a bit like, oh, am I going to go work for this DAO on a public forum? Were they up for it, or were they hesitant? How did that come across?
Yeah, so as far as actually doing the procurement process, I said a minute ago, like, fast forward to June. Well, it wasn't really fast forward. That whole time, we were working on it. And the way it started was for the risk assessment provider is a bit easier. There's not a whole lot of entities in the space, so kind of made a short list really quickly. There was only one who at the time had an offering of ecosystem risk. So, some of them focused on app risk, and Gauntlet specifically had a product for ecosystem risk, as well as was already active in, governance over here and has worked with DAOs before. So getting them on board was, I wouldn't say easy, but Blockworks already had a connection there, as well as all the other quantitative risk assessment firms as well. So it wasn't too much of a struggle to get them onboarded. Trailbits was a bit of a harder process. So I started by making a list of every Arbitrum auditor, everyone in the Arbitrum ecosystem who had ever audited a protocol, and got up to almost 100 different auditing firms. At that point, I shortlisted, went through all of them, it took about 3 weeks, did a deep dive into the space, like who has the best reputation, who does the foundation, who does Off-Chain Labs work with. And at the end of the day, shortlisted a list of about 5 or 6. There's a ton of really, really good auditors on that list. But at the same time, it was interesting to hear everyone talk about Trailbits, because even the other auditing firms had a lot of respect for this company. And something I didn't realize, but they're really like a blue chip service provider in this industry. So, it was pretty easy to be like, okay, this is who we want involved in the coalition. Getting them on board was a little bit harder because they've never done any work with DAOs before. So it took a while to kind of work my way up to someone who's a decision maker over there, and then having to kind of sell him on the idea of, all right, this is why we're working for a DAO. We're not working for a DAO because it's the easiest customer to work for. As I think everyone knows, DAOs are not the easiest to work with, but at the same time, it actually provides some value to the space. And I truly believe that being subservient to the DAO is a huge value add for the future of decentralization across crypto. So, I think my passion for that idea helped drive some of them to get interested and get involved, and eventually to negotiate good rates as well.
Well, let's talk about the reaction then to your proposal. You've obviously put on a huge amount of work in the back end to get this ready. You submitted it to the DAO. What happened? What was the community's reaction? How, from your perspective, at least anyway, how do you think that went?
So it's very divided. There was a lot of delegates who I think, were a huge fan of the idea. I think more or less pretty much everyone liked the idea of having, service providers onboarded to help provide tools to make the life of a delegate easier, and to help, allow them to make more sophisticated decisions in a more efficient manner. So overall, I think the idea was really well received. A lot of delegates, I think, really liked the idea kind of as proposed with the service providers that were involved in it. The two major concerns that I heard, and obviously it ended up failing, so these were predominant among lots of delegates and a lot of ARB power, but it was service provider lock-in. I guess there's really 3. Service provider lock-in. There was one specific thing in the proposal called service provider onboarding framework, which caused a big stir. And then the third would be that it was not an open process, that it was not an RFP, that it was these service providers were included. So people didn't like that it was 12 months, and that the service providers were decided ahead of time instead of voted on. And then also there was some nuanced things within the proposal that were not well received as well.
I mean, maybe one as a good way to describe it then is, do you feel like the proposal focused too much on how to instantiate it? Here's some service providers up front, and then eventually there's going to be a way to replace them. And do you feel like maybe on hindsight it's be more about the framework, the focus of the proposal? Do you think there's anything you could have done really to sort of, on hindsight, based on all the feedback that you know?
Yeah, in hindsight, the way I would have set it up was with a shorter term. So it would have been 6 months instead of 12 months. And it would not have included any details specifically on what the frameworks that we would work on were. It would just be at the discretion of the DAO. We have the ability to help create frameworks. I think that would have curbed a lot of issues, but it still might not have passed at that point. Really, I think that the RFP process, where any service provider can be applied to be a part of this cohort, is the main issue that a lot of delegates saw. And hopefully, now there's a new proposal up that kind of succumbs to this desire. So hopefully that's something that we see pass, because I still think the idea is very valuable. One thing that comes to mind though is it's hard to get someone to just go create that RFP process. So maybe we needed the proposal to fail in the same way that maybe Camelot's proposal needed to fail to get the conversation started.
Yeah, I mean, I want to ask about the upcoming proposal now, but before we do that, one thing I did notice in the conversation, and even blew my mind, Trail of Bits was engaging on the forum. They were replying to people's comments on your proposal. And as you just said, they're like a blue chip company that's never worked with a DAO before. You know, what type of DAO magic did you sprinkle on them? Like, like how did you like I know you can convince them. Like, what are your thoughts about them commenting on the forum? To me, that was a pretty big deal.
I think it's amazing, right? Like we have all, there's plenty of really good service providers that operate in DAOs today, but for the most part, there's a lot of amazing service providers in crypto who it's just not something they're interested in. It's not something they're willing to do. So, if you did host this RFP process, Trailbits probably wouldn't have even heard about it. Now they will, of course, but there's lots of service providers who we want to be here, who we want to be active in the DAO and want to be eligible for these types of, for these types of proposals, but that it's just not something they're doing. I think it was kind of what I was alluding to earlier with posing it as this is something that's good for the future of decentralization. I think they agreed, and I got to give a big shout out to Jocelyn over at Trailbits, who is their head of smart contract auditing, and he went full steam ahead. He got very obsessed with the idea of, okay, like maybe this is right, maybe we should be subservient to the DAO to kind of help the future of the space. And it's amazing to see that other people buy into that kind of belief as well, because I definitely know I do.
That's incredible, though. So even though this failed, maybe they're still willing to participate in the future, as you said, with an RFC process or RFP, they're willing to join in. And let's get to that then. So, what are your thoughts now then? Is this do you plan to iterate on this? Because I saw there's a proposal by a mutable lawyer, for example, even on an RFC. I guess DK is working on a security one. What are your thoughts? How do you think this moves forward from here?
Yeah, I got to give a big shout out to Immutable Lawyer, because he just took full initiative on kind of taking the proposal, taking into account the main feedback from delegates, and putting it back up on Snapshot and Forum and then Snapshot. So it's on Snapshot right now. We didn't really, he sent it to us for review a few days before when he sent it to a lot of other delegates. But at the end of the day, we didn't really have a large part. So Immutable Lawyer really took a lot of initiative here. The proposal is more or less the exact same scope as the coalition. There's, a few minute changes. For instance, the service provider onboarding framework versus just helping with framework creation that I mentioned earlier. The term is reduced to 6 months. And of course, it's an RFP process. So any service provider would be able to apply to be a part of this cohort. So I think, he did a really good job at taking the same feedback that I saw and putting it back up, but it is pretty much the same proposal. So hopefully it passes. And if it does, I know Blockworks is still more than interested and will definitely be participating in the RFP process in hopes of, maybe being a part of the cohort that we initially proposed. But I think it's going to be awesome to see, because hopefully we're able to get a lot of those service providers who aren't active in the forum today to at least, get interested and active. And then maybe even if they don't receive funding, they'll still be active after. I know we would be.
Yeah, and we only have a few minutes left now. So I just want to ask so based on your experience, because you're also just very active in a lot of these proposals on the forum, you're like Blockworks in general is a very active delegate. Are there any learnings from this entire process, one with this proposal and just your experience so far, that maybe future authors can take away from this? Maybe some lessons they can learn before they submit their proposals to the DAO.
I think one big lesson I learned was that no matter how much good support you have among delegates before the proposal goes up on the forum, for instance, you hear that people really like it. At the end of the day, it's the comments that are going to drive people's opinions. Like if I tell you right now this proposal and you might think it's a great idea, but then once it's in front of 30 people, maybe one of those people has a really sophisticated thought that didn't come to mind at first. That's one of the awesome parts about DAOs, right? You get to hear both sides of the aisle, and you kind of hear it hashed out in the forum comments, and you get a lot of smart actors who are interested. So I think that makes it a bit of an interesting perspective. Moral of the story here is put it on the forum, iterate it quickly. Don't worry too much about lobbying delegates or whatever you want to call it beforehand, and rather just get it in the forum and iterate as you see feedback there. Yeah, I think that would be my biggest takeaway probably.
Awesome. And maybe one last question. Do you think the forum is a good representation of the conversation for the DAO? Because I know there's also these Telegram chats that people chat on. Do you feel like what ultimately ends on the forum, it's a good record of sort of how people think about these proposals?
It's an interesting question. I think that today it's pretty good. Today it's pretty good, but in the future we might see more participants who don't have delegation. At that point, it might get difficult to read through all the comments. Like I know the coalition proposal had some 185 comments. Luckily, we have a group of very, very, we have a great group of delegates in Arbitrum who really care. So I actually think the majority of the big delegates do read through all the comments and form their own opinion based on it. But I do think that might change in the future as far as, the form comments might not be the best representation. Also, it's kind of just, it's interesting because some of the bigger delegates, and it's probably a bandwidth problem. It's nothing on them. It's, we're all doing this out of, our love for Arbitrum, out of wanting to make the space better in the future. But also we all have our own, whatever initiatives we're working on and we get busy. So some of the bigger delegates, don't participate as actively. So that is definitely something that is troubling, I guess, just as far as, how do you as a proposer form an idea on what the three biggest delegates who control some 1/3 of voting power on the average proposal, like how do you get a good idea of what they're thinking? But I think this is, something the DAO is working on. Obviously, there's the proposal up right now to create delegate incentives. Maybe that'll help a little bit. Maybe creating something like the new version of the coalition, which the title has been changed to the delegate advocacy group or something of that nature. Like maybe that will help. So I think over time, like this will get better, but it is just something to keep in mind today, which is you can participate super actively in the Telegram, in the forum, in whatever channels, the calls that we host regularly. But at the same time, you might still not have a great idea of what the biggest ARB delegates are thinking at any given time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know there's one or two delegates in particular where they don't really join the conversation as much, but they read everything. They're extremely diligent. Just don't know what their opinion's going to be until they vote.
I gotta give a huge shout out to Olympio here because he's the perfect representation of what you said. And he's not super, or he or she or they're not super active in the comments, but as far as the actual amount of care that they put into making their vote, it's like they voted against the coalition, but it is obvious that they formed that opinion with a whole lot of a love for Arbitrum. So absolutely no animosity, and big shout out to them.
Awesome. Well, we're just out of time now, but thank you very much, Matt, for joining. I think everyone here has really enjoyed the conversation. I can see that in the chat.
Thanks for having me, Pat. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And then next up is Mark from Cyfrin. So hopefully, oh, look at that. That was really fast.
Hey, Patrick. How you doing?
Doing all right. Top of the morning to you. We can jump in if you want. So Mark, you're from Cyfrin. I guess in a way, Cyfrin's like a new entrant to the DAO in a sense. Yeah. I think your team's a big fan of Arbitrum, generally speaking. I know for some of the educational videos you've done a lot already on Arbitrum, but I think this is like your first time dipping your toes into the DAO itself. So let's maybe get to know. Yeah, so let's get to know a bit about yourself. Anyway, what's your name, what project are you associated with, and what do you spend most of your workday doing?
Yeah, so I'm the CSO at Cyfrin. Most of my workday is essentially supporting, advising protocols on the best approach to security. We also have an educational platform as well called Updraft. So that's something that I also work on quite a bit in terms of sponsorships and overall community building within the educational piece.
Awesome. And how did you get involved in Arbitrum? Or even crypto in general? What's your backstory? How did you come down this rabbit hole with us?
Yeah, it feels like it's been 10 years, and it's probably only been about 3 or 4. But yeah, I was previously the strategic lead for Proof of Reserve at Chainlink Labs. So I had a lot of exposure to Arbitrum projects whilst at Chainlink. I had previously worked as well within a fundraising capacity for an early stage VC. So that was kind of my first real entrance into crypto. I was supporting essentially projects who were fundraising, and then that really piqued my interest in sort of blockchain, and that's then when I joined Chainlink Labs, and then from there have recently joined Cyfrin with a couple of other sort of ex-Chainlink Labs people. So Patrick Collins, who probably everyone will know very, very well. No one ever tends to know me, but knows Patrick. Yeah, so I constantly get on calls and everyone goes, "Oh, are you Patrick's mate?" So that's kind of how it works. And then we also, one of our other co-founders is Alex Rohn, who was one of the lead engineers at Chainlink, worked on CCIP and staking there. And then Hans Fries is our other co-founder too. He was the #1 ranked competitive auditor for the whole of 2022. So yeah, we put together this team. We haven't been going for super long. We've been going for about 12 months now. We've got to about 23, 24 people. So yeah, growing quite a lot. But yeah, it was, I suppose, like the entrance into Arbitrum was, you know, we all had a good idea of the Arbitrum ecosystem. Patrick Collins is a huge advocate for Arbitrum, as you can probably see from a lot of the educational videos that he does. Everything is built on Arbitrum. So yeah, that was kind of our entrance in, really.
That's awesome. And just to highlight, because I think this is going to be important for the discussion, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
Cyfrin has a huge online educational platform, and it's also focusing on security audits. And your proposal in particular, the proposal that reached the DAO, was, you know, named Arbitrum Security Enhancement Fund. So do you want to walk us through your proposal? You know, what problem was it trying to solve? You know, why is it useful to the ecosystem? And just generally, you know, what were your thoughts behind your proposal?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think to go back to the core reasoning is 2022, 7% of all DeFi TVL was hacked, right? So there's a huge issue with security within Web3. The example that I always give is if you were to go into a bank and open an account and they said, look, there's a 1% chance, 1% of our customers lose their funds and they never get it back. You would never open an account with that bank. In DeFi, that's 7%, right? So there's a huge issue there. What we really were focusing on was like, why is this happening? And I think approaches to security are potentially one of the reasons. And we at Cyfrin, we have a model called a multi-phase audit, right? So you start with a private audit that will be 2 to 3 lead security reviewers who will work through your code base. They won't context switch. They'll consistently, you know, be in contact with the team. Very, very developer first approach to security reviews. Then after that, we advise that you do a competitive audit. A competitive audit is a different crowd essentially to the private audit space, because you have hundreds of competitive auditors competing on the platform to find vulnerabilities for the prize pool. So with these sort of like 2 approaches, you tend to get different vulnerabilities and essentially like different vulnerabilities found through these 2 approaches. And then after that, you would have a bug bounty program as well. So the way we view security is not you've had like a private audit, here's your badge, you're not going to get hacked, it's all good, your funds are safe. That's just not the situation. The situation is it's a constant consideration. Now, if you're taking a private audit, a competitive audit, and a bug bounty, and you're saying to protocols that this is what you should be doing, their response is never, that's a terrible idea, we want more security. But their response tends to be to that sounds great, but do you know what? We can't afford it, right? That is a huge issue. Like to actually pay, you know, a 5-6 week private audit, to then put up the prize pool for a competitive, to then, you know, have a bug bounty program. This costs a lot of money. Protocols are building in a bear market, right? They're running dry from investment from the previous sort of cycle. And this isn't just for new protocols coming up. This is also for existing, what you would describe as like large, big protocols in the space. So the reason we kind of went to Arbitrum was to say, we're speaking to a lot of projects on Arbitrum who are saying we can't actually afford the level of security required before we launch the protocol, make an upgrade to the protocol. So our sort of like reasoning to that was then, okay, well, let's make a proposal to the DAO to say, will you cover a certain percentage of their security costs so that, you know, the chances, and it's never 100%, but the chances of them getting hacked or having a vulnerability is lowered. I think the big thing for us with that was, just being able to provide, the ability for new protocols, as I said, and existing protocols to come in and get that and to get that funding moving forward, really.
Yeah, so maybe just to summarize that, it sounds like in your case, there's three steps, I guess. There's one that's more like a personal audit by people in your team.
Yeah.
Then there's this open process with, hopefully talented, auditors can come find more bugs. And I guess the third part, the bug bounty, maybe that's just something the company runs on their own. I don't know if Cyfrin facilitates that. But then...
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So competitive audits, we have our private audits and competitive audits through Codehawks, and then we will be bringing out our own bug bounty program as well.
Awesome. And then in your proposal, the idea was that it was going to subsidize, I guess, the first two parts. It would subsidize the audit by your team, and it would also subsidize the open process.
Yeah, it would then subsidize a percentage of the prize pool for the competitive audit. So the percentages were 60%, and then in some cases 80%, depending on the circumstance.
Awesome. So that's basically what your proposal was about, and then you submitted it to the forum. And what happened next? What was the community's reaction to your post?
So interesting. We thought it was good to begin with, and you definitely come in. This is the first time we'd ever done this, right? And actually, I want to give a huge shout out to Disruption Joe, L2B. There's Olympia. I get there's loads of people who really actually help guide us through the process. And the response was really good to begin with, but then I think, certain concerns started to crop up, essentially, and those concerns very much were centered around the essentially procurement, having an actual process in place for private audit firms or security firms in general. After we made our proposal and that went up on the forum, a load of other security firms started then making proposals. So I think it was difficult then for the DAO to distinguish, right, who's actually a good auditing firm and who's not, right? So I think that was the big issue, and what's transpired from that. And again, a huge shout out to Immutable Lawyer and DK. They've now put this procurement process in place, and I'm super surprised at how quickly they did it and with the level of detail that they've done it in. But yeah, that was the situation really with regards to how the proposal was received.
I mean, I think that's really interesting. That's very different to the first two, first two fireside chats that we had, because you submitted your proposal, and then, in a way, competitors started submitting their proposals. You sort of kick-started this procurement process, this RFP.
Yeah,
without realizing it.
So yeah, it was. There's a lot of stuff, and I think it's quite maybe indicative of today. It's there's a lot of do as I say, not as I do, that this sort of goes around, right? And our real ethos with our education and with the way that we review security is to level up Web3 and to support ecosystems like Arbitrum. So when we actually started seeing all these proposals coming through, and then the procurement process conversation happening, it was actually really good. It wasn't something that we're annoyed about. Yes, we knew that our proposal was probably going to suffer because of this, but it sparked a wider conversation that we think has improved the process within the DAO. So that was something that we were super happy about, to be perfectly honest.
That's great. And then, as you mentioned, there was a Immutable Lawyer and DK have been working on this procurement process. Are you involved in that at all? How did is there a working group, or how did that sort of come about?
Yeah, we've been working with DK and Immutable Lawyer. There's a working group. I know that other security firms are involved in that as well, which is great. Look, at the end of the day, Cyfrin and Codehawks for our competitive platform, we can't be the only people doing this. It's not scalable. We need as many quality security reviewers in the space as possible. So for us to have other people contributing to this as well is really, really important. And it's something that, we come with an idea and then another security firm comes with another idea. It's only leveling up Web3 as we know it.
That's awesome. And I even know from the foundation side, I think for our grant program, a significant number of our grants are just for audits. So I think I already said that other people, if there is a procurement process set up and auditors are picked by the DAO, we're also probably going to send projects over there, because the one thing there's always audits are always on demand.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like it's the way that this actually happened. It felt to me that it felt like adults had started to enter the room with the procurement process, like having things like KYB, and it's really good to see. And I do think it's just going to benefit the ecosystem as a whole.
That's awesome. I have two last questions. And one is actually more to do with Cyfrin, because obviously we've spoken a lot about the security audit part. But,
of course, yeah.
As you mentioned during this chat, it does have this huge educational platform as well. That's a little unique. Like, how does that tie in together? In one stage you're auditing the code, next thing you know, you're on YouTube teaching people on how to use the software. Why the two sides to the business? I don't know.
I think the most important thing is particularly for security, is education, right? Patrick Collins has his YouTube courses, and they were extremely popular. I think he was the most watched Solidity developer, and to be able to provide access to top quality security content for free is the big goal, right? I think the number of developers in Web3 is actually not that big. I can't off the top of my head remember the numbers, but in comparison to developers in Web 2, it's minute. So what we're really aiming to do is bring the best talent from Web 2 over to Web 3 with this education. It's all built on Arbitrum. All of our education through Updraft, all the code is done on Arbitrum, and the coding and we have a syllabus dedicated to Arbitrum as well. And it's just about getting new developers into the space, leveling them up, and also supporting Web3 developers who are already in the space in essentially leveling up their security practices, because these are the builders of tomorrow, and they need to know the best security practices moving forward. They need to know the best platforms to use. They need to know the best techniques to use for security, like even before they come to a private audit, as an example. So we think education is the most important thing for the Web3 space, particularly with security.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. I mean, I always make the joke at the foundation, we have like 0 DevRel function right now, which is true, by the way. We have no DevRel function at this point. I wonder sometimes how Arbitrum is so successful without any DevRels. But maybe at some point there would be an education framework out there, where hopefully the DAO can start outsourcing DevRels to people. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that. We actually, our first iteration of the proposal was an education and security fund proposal. So it was an eclectic mix of both. But we actually ended up splitting up the proposals because we were concerned that the message from both got lost and it wasn't clear what we were trying to achieve. I mean, it was unsuccessful anyway, but it's still it was the way that we decided to split it up in the end.
That's awesome. But maybe hopefully with the new procurement process, everything works out in the end, hopefully. And just one last question, because I know we're just on like roughly around time, is sort of like, you're a new startup, you're 12 months old, you came into the DAO, you submitted a proposal. I don't know how much DAO experience your team has in the past. And what are the learnings from this? Like, do you think it was worth it in the end? Do you believe it was a good experience? Is there anything you would do differently next time? How do you feel about that? Like, it's pretty courageous to even go to the DAO to begin with for a lot of these proposals.
Yeah, as I said, like there's so many people like who we want to thank. I mean, there was like Seb at Gains and Coin at GMX as well. Like all these people like who were giving us it's too many to name. Were actually super helpful to as I think Joe as well, as I've mentioned, like just really did handhold us throughout the process. I think it was very good on that front. I think you come to it thinking why wouldn't this be successful? We've got everything in place, expecting it to go swimmingly. But the reality is that, you know, there's lots of different opinions out there, and also those opinions are extremely valid ones, right? There's a lot of very, very smart people within the DAO. And I think on reflection, what we do differently is, get a few more opinions before we actually posted on the forum, because it was evident to us that there were a few things that we hadn't fully thought through. So that's something that we would change in the future. But for us, it was an amazing learning experience. It really stood out to me personally how much everybody cares about the ecosystem. I don't think there was never anybody who was not supportive or helping out. It was really, really nice to see. And it was a great experience for us, and we're super excited to get another proposal. And as I think Iron Boots and Matt both said, hopefully next year we'll be on the Successful panel, which is always cool.
Hopefully. I think that's quite funny, the Successful panel.
Yeah.
Well, with that anyway, thank you very much, Mark, for joining the fireside chat. I hope the audience enjoyed this conversation. So hopefully next year in the Successful panel.
Thank you very much for having me, and pleasure as always, Patrick.